Good morning, I'm Sharyl and welcome to Full Measure. Republican presidential candidate Ben Carson is up in the polls. We'll talk with him in a few minutes. But first, a story of incredible waste of your tax dollars. Since 2002, the U.S. has given more than $116 billion to help rebuild Afghanistan. In 2012, President Obama appointed investigator John Sopko to lead the job of policing waste, fraud, and abuse in that spending. This is the story of what happened when some generals on the ground at a U.S. military base tipped Sopko off to the strange circumstances surrounding a building project called 64K.
It was the best built building I had seen and still have seen in Afghanistan.
Inspector General John Sopko is talking about his tour of this building, bigger than a football field, shown on satellite photos at the U.S. military's Camp Leatherneck in south-central Afghanistan.
It's a beautiful building. It was well done. Fully furnished. It was huge, 64,000 approximately square feet.
Nicknamed 64K because of its size, Congress intended it to be headquarters for the 2010 U.S. military surge of 30,000 troops to fight Taliban Islamic extremists. There was just one problem.
The Marine commander, the general in the ground running the surge, said, "I don't want it, I don't need it, don't build it." And two other generals above him said the same thing. Don't build it. We don't need it. We already have a headquarters. It's a waste of money.
Yet the project moved forward, a facility designed to be big enough for a staff of 1,200, complete with a war room and briefing theater. But 64K never served as a surge headquarters. In fact, it was still under construction when the surge ended in 2012. Yet U.S. tax dollars continued to pour in for upgrades. $3 million for audio and video electronics, another $500,000 for a video teleconference suite. Can you explain the mindset on a project that nobody wants anyway and is probably not going to be used, in which they keep upgrading it?
It is indicative of a problem in Afghanistan that we see time and again. You have the money, spend it. And that is the problem, not only in Afghanistan and not only with the military. It's a problem, I think, with the entire government. Once money is appropriated, you just spend it.
Sopko puts the total cost of the project, including roads and utilities, at $36 million.
My left ear is the worst one.
That kind of waste has real meaning to Rick Helsley, a Marine Corps veteran who served in Afghanistan.
It's very frustrating because it's a constant struggle, especially active duty. I have friends that are working extra jobs on top of being in the military, trying to make ends meet. I have veteran friends that are scrounging the bottom of the barrel.
He's now attending college, working a security job, and struggling to get by with service-related disabilities that he says include back and hearing problems.
I read about them trying to cut active duty members' benefits and everything else, but they can go spend $30-some-odd million on a building that nobody even needs.
Sopko, too, wanted to know just why 64K got built. Tipped off by generals on the ground, he sank his teeth into the mystery, only to feel stonewalled. In emails, Colonel Norman Allen, a senior military lawyer, told fellow officers he wanted to slow-roll responses to the Inspector General's questions. When Sopko directed them to preserve documents, Colonel Allen emailed, "I don't know that he has authority to tell us to do that."
We found that very discouraging because it bordered on obstruction of our investigation.
Colonel Allen didn't respond to our interview requests. In writing, he said he never sought to interfere with the investigation and took strong exception to allegations that he did. Sopko still managed to get a lot of evidence. Exhibit A came from Commander Larry Nicholson, lead general at Camp Leatherneck when 64K was commissioned.
My expectations for you are very high.
Nicholson had said in military emails, "I was greatly surprised, as were my colonels, to see that the 64K project had been initiated. We were very pleased with the current headquarters. I am confident that neither I or any of my team asked for, signed for, or formally or informally requested a new future headquarters for my successors." In May, SOPCO released his findings and finally identified who reversed the generals on the ground to give 64K the green light.
We found out that there was a general who was stationed in Kuwait.
Major General Pete Van Gel.
General Van Gel made a decision that since the money had been appropriated, a supplemental appropriation from Congress, that it would not have been prudent to give the money back even though you didn't need it. So basically, it was his decision.
Van Gel, now retired, declined our interview request, but disputed the findings. He said 64K addressed an operational need, and the project was in line with the military's strategic intent. The Pentagon defended Van Gel's decision as prudent and said Camp Leatherneck was being considered as a potential enduring location for the military until the Obama administration decided to pull out of Afghanistan. If you could tell someone who built that building, the general who said, go ahead, what would you say to him?
Why exactly did you spend $36 million on a building that nobody wanted or needed when there's so many other things you could have spent that money on?
In October of last year, the U.S. handed the brand new vacant 64K over to the Afghans, who discovered it was wired for U.S. electricity, not what they use, and found it too expensive to fully occupy.
That's the 64K. A wasted building, basically a 64,000 square foot white elephant in the desert that's probably going to deteriorate and fall down eventually because the Afghans cannot sustain it.
Today, 64K stands as a monument to wasted military construction dollars. Probably the nicest facility the U.S. ever built, but never occupied in all of Afghanistan, courtesy of American taxpayers. The Pentagon rejected all of SOPCO's recommendations for discipline, saying the officers involved did nothing wrong. And a final note, the millions of tax dollars to build 64K didn't even benefit a U.S. company, but a British contractor. Still ahead on Full Measure, a new poll shows an overwhelming number of Americans feel radical Islamic terrorism poses a serious threat to the United States. And as the Obama administration announces a major change in policy in Syria, we'll speak with a former U.S. ambassador to Syria who resigned in protest. Friday, an abrupt about-face ended the Pentagon's $500 million failed program to train Syrian rebels to fight ISIS. Last month, it was revealed that after spending all that tax money, it resulted in only 4 or 5 fighters.
I wasn't satisfied with the early efforts in that regard, and so we're looking at different ways to achieve basically the same kind of strategic objective, which is the right one, which is to enable capable, motivated forces on the ground to retake territory from ISIL and reclaim Syrian territory from extremisms.
The new policy, instead of training rebel fighters, will simply send weapons and support through rebel leaders who are already fighting and showing some signs of success. President Obama's ambassador to Syria, Robert Ford, quit last year as conditions devolved. We spoke to him earlier about policy and why he resigned.
The reason is that I could no longer defend the administration's policy on Syria. It wasn't working. I knew it wasn't working. I knew it wasn't going to work.
In handling the refugee crisis, are we handling what's causing it, and shouldn't we be?
Well, it's the worst refugee crisis since World War II, and it's a terrible human tragedy. It's just awful. And trying to fix the refugee problem in Germany or Greece or Macedonia isn't going to fix the refugee problem at all, because it goes back to the horrible fighting and the destruction in Syrian cities, and now well over 200,000 Syrians killed, and the number is rising very quickly. It'll be, I hate to say it, but it'll be 300,000, and if it goes on, 400,000. The way to fix this is to get a new national unity government that Syrians agree on that does 2 things. Number 1, mobilizes more Syrians to fight these extremists that we've been talking about, but on the other hand, begins to rebuild the country with international support. That's the way you're going to begin not only to stop the flow of refugees out, but actually then to encourage many Syrians to come home. Rebuilding Syria will take decades.
What are they fighting about and why now?
The uprising started in 2011 because people were tired of the government's secret police coming at night, knocking on the door, dragging people away, sometimes for years at a time, torturing them, all for having spoken in favor of some policy in opposition to the government, peacefully speaking in opposition to the government.
How did the Islamic extremist group ISIS enter into this mix, which sounds like it had nothing to do with it initially?
Initially, it didn't have anything to do with it. And when a government loses control and you're in a situation where there's violence, you can almost bet that extremists will start to set up. In a sense, it's a three-sided civil war between the Assad government, very brutal, caused the problem to start with, jihadi extremists, second side of the triangle, and more moderate opposition, both political and armed elements. And at different times, these sides are all fighting each other. It's kind of a three-way battle. And so it makes no sense to help either extremists or Assad. The side to help is the third side that wants to get to the political negotiation.
And so if you could verbalize or encapsulate what our policy today is, what would you say it is?
It's calling for peace talks that will never come.
The fighting in Syria has led to an exodus of millions and led to security worries in countries accepting refugees. A new Full Measure Rasmussen Reports poll released today offers a clear sign Americans are concerned about terrorism. We asked, how serious a threat is radical Islamic terrorism to the United States? The response, over 90% say it's either very or somewhat serious. Some worry the refugees entering Europe and the U.S. pose a current risk. Scott Thuman, reporting from Europe, found some believe the real danger may be decades in the making.
One look at the growing refugee crisis across Europe and the Middle East, and you quickly realize this problem is not going away. How many people are living in here?
About 100.
100 people in this tent. And the influx is so determined to call a new country home, they dig in for the long haul. Even in a camp so squalid, so rancid with disease and despair, it is known as the jungle.
We want a safe country. A safe country.
Ebnandizar was a teacher in Syria who says he fled when a bomb hit, killing 15 of his students, with nothing to return to but threats.
From the army, want to kill us, kill my family.
There's no way of knowing just who's been living here, or for that matter, even how many. Low estimates around 1,500. We've heard as high as 5,000. And that confusion is a big part of the problem. To what degree can the average person or a member of law enforcement have any confidence that they know exactly who they're dealing with?
The risk is obvious that this flow of refugees will be used by organizations like Islamic State to infiltrate operatives into Western societies.
But it's not this generation of refugees that pose the greatest threat, says Harris Rafiq of the Quilliam Foundation.
What worries me is that the people that are coming over in terms of the adults will be okay. But if we learned a lesson from what happened with the migrants that came over post-World War II in Europe, their youngsters or their grandchildren may be people that can be targeted much more easily by Salafist and jihadists because there is a potential lack of identities.
As a result, he says America needs to change tactics from countering attacks to preventing them.
I think in the US, there's a sleeping giant in terms of terrorism.
I'm not sure that there's a real risk of radicalization of refugees, to be honest, because those people who have come here, in most cases, in fact, in all cases, they've come because they know that we are a safe, democratic country and they admire those principles.
Zoe Gardner, who helps refugees gain asylum, like in this London neighborhood, says there have to be more than just jobs. There have to be open arms.
Because we're talking about people who, you know, in a large proportion of cases may have experienced torture, arbitrary detention, been through war, seen unthinkable horrors.
But refusing refugees altogether, some warn, could be the real pitfall, prompting radicalization in the future by anyone turning their backs now.
The greater evil arises from not taking these people. If the message goes out for the United States and Western Europe, Muslim lives are worth nothing, that is a message that in the long term can resonate much more powerfully.
And Sharyl, he adds that not taking refugees creates both a political and a cultural karma that could come back to haunt us in all sorts of ways.
What do you think is the perception overseas about the U.S. role at the crisis?
Well, to be honest, a lot of criticism. People kept telling me when I was over there, they believe the U.S. isn't doing enough, should be more to take on refugees. Important to note, though, the U.S. has given about $4.2 billion in aid so far. That's more than any other country has.
And we're accepting quite a few in the coming year or so.
Yeah, the plan 10,000 just in the next year.
Thanks, Scott. Ahead, our interview with presidential candidate Ben Carson. What do you see as a strength and a weakness of each of the three top Democrats you could face? Republican presidential candidate Ben Carson has been under attack in the news media for defending gun rights after the Oregon mass shootings. So far, it hasn't seemed to hurt his rising poll numbers. We caught up with him this week and asked about another hot-button issue, an administration plan to accept up to 200,000 refugees by 2017.
I don't think that our policies make a whole lot of sense. First of all, if you have people coming out of a region of the world where you're likely to have infiltration by jihadists, why would you bring them into a country that they are dedicated to destroying? Now, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't be sympathetic to the refugees and that we can't use some of our expertise and even financial resources.
What is your faith personally, and how large a role would that play in the decisions you make as Commander-in-Chief?
I am a Christian, belong to the Seventh-day Adventist denomination. I believe in godly principles of loving your fellow man, caring about your neighbor, developing your God-given talents to the utmost so that you become valuable to the people around you.
Do you believe in separation of church and state, that there should be a line drawn?
I do believe there should be a line drawn.
What is your view on what's happening around the globe and here in the U.S. in terms of what's in the Bible? Do you think we're at the end of days?
You could guess that we are getting closer to that. You do have people who have a belief system that sees this apocalyptic phenomena occurring and that they are a part of it, and who would not hesitate to use nuclear weapons if they gain possession of them.
So is there a chance to change the course if it is something that's prophesized?
I think we have a chance to certainly do everything that we can to ameliorate the situation and provide. I would always be shooting for peace. I wouldn't just take a fatalistic view of things.
Describe your view of what makes a Democrat, what makes a Republican, and what makes a socialist.
Technically, those who want a government to control things, those would be Democrats and socialists. Republicans would tend to be people who want individuals to be in control of their life, with the government there just to facilitate.
What do you see as a strength and a weakness of each of the three top Democrats you could face? First, Hillary Clinton.
Dishonesty, lack of integrity.
What about a strength?
A strength would be tenacity.
And Joe Biden?
A strength would be amicability. A weakness would be embracing of Obama's policies.
And Bernie Sanders?
A weakness would be being a socialist. And a strength would be being a populist.
And people might be interested that you have three sons who each married non-American born wives.
They all did. I don't think they intended for that to happen, but these are the women that they met in school or in church. And, you know, the romance blossomed, and they're all very happy. So
do you mind telling me again where each of the daughter-in-laws was born?
One was from Jamaica, one from India, and one from Syria.
There's much more of our conversation with Ben Carson on our website, fullmeasure.news. We'll be right back. A full measure thumbs down goes to the Justice Department for its Freedom of Information reply to ATF agent John Dodson. In 2011, Dodson blew the whistle on the Justice Department's deadly Fast and Furious operation that let Mexican drug cartels buy thousands of weapons. In 2012, he asked for any internal documents discussing his whistleblowing. This week, the Justice Department sent internal news briefings about Fast and Furious, including some of my reports. Put simply, it took them 3 years to hand over news articles that were already in the public record. Starting a broadcast is an exciting new challenge, and many of you were kind enough to send along your thoughts on our program last week. We thought we'd share a few of those with you. Frank tweeted, "Enjoyed your first show. Look forward to more shows peeling back the layers of government scandal." Cliff wrote, "Excellent premiere show, asylum segment, very informative and enlightening." This tweet from Harry, "Watching now, very refreshing, all viewpoints covered without Atkinson pursuing an agenda." And finally, Chef LA says, "At Full Measure News is a winner. Good topics, and ask Trump the questions I would have. Real News is back. Thanks." And in full disclosure, we did hear from a viewer who thought I was a little too tough on Donald Trump, but he seems just fine. We welcome all your feedback and comments. Remember to like our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter at Full Measure News. Thanks for spending part of your Sunday with us. Until next time, check us out at fullmeasure.news. I'm Sharyl Atkinson. We'll be looking for more stories that hold powers accountable.